Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex and I'm joined here by Alastair.
Hello, Alex. Hello, everyone.
And this week we're going to be speaking about how the pressure is mounting on Israel.
That's right. The international pressure is mounting. And as Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said, their allies have a short memory. We're going to be discussing that.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at different countries who are allies of Israel, but they're not exactly showing that at the moment. So we want to challenge that. But first of all, we want to have a particular focus on the Israeli hostages who are still being held in Gaza as we speak.
Well, I think it's important that we remember that the hostages it should be at the forefront of our prayers, and particularly must be part of the context of what we are discussing when it comes to Israel's actions in Gaza.
Yeah.
It does feel, I mean, it's encouraging to see the stories of the released hostages and those who are still held captive in Gaza, to see those reports in the news. But it does feel to me that very often there isn't enough focus in the media on the fact that 130, I think I saw the figure today, 133 hostages that are Israeli hostages that are still held captive in Gaza. Included in that number, sadly, Israel believes that there are around 30 bodies to recover. But Israel is not going to stop its offensive until all of those hostages have been released.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say as well, this war, it would never have started if Hamas did not kidnap and murder Israelis.
Well,
but
the
also,
7th of October in
yeah.
itself, if that had not happened, of course, that this would not have, this would not have happened.
Yeah, and it could be over right now if Hamas released all of the hostages and surrendered its weapons and gave up.
Yes.
But instead, Hamas is doubling down. They are carrying on this terrorism that they're doing.
Yes.
And as a result, Hamas has got the greatest PR scheme in the world because the whole world is turning against Israel.
Every discussion about this conflict in the international community must be preceded by a call for the release of every single individual that is currently held hostage in Gaza. And then we must also not forget the humanitarian suffering that these hostages are going through, have gone through 165 days since they were kidnapped from inside Israel. There are many stories from those that were released about the environment that they are kept in, the psychological torture, the physical torture, the abuse which is committed, and of course the very human suffering of being separated from family members and not knowing what the day holds, knowing perhaps or not knowing whether their close loved ones are dead or alive.
Exactly.
All of that should be such a burden for us. And we must take that burden in prayer for their welfare, for their ongoing welfare, for however long they're going to be held captive. We must continue to pray for their welfare, but also pray for their release. And I think it's just really, really important that we continue to highlight that, we continue to call for it.
Yeah.
Let us not have any discussion with our members of parliament or whoever without making that call.
Yeah.
Because it has been noticeable, I think, that the attention has deliberately shifted onto Israel's actions.
Yeah.
And yet the very reason why there are boots on the ground, why there are members of the IDF that have lost their lives for their fellow brethren that are being held against their will by Hamas. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And I think, I think the media and many people have a a hard time actually talking about this because they are seeing what's happening in Gaza. They see suffering that's going on there, and they can't really equate the two. But actually, when it comes to what's happened to Israel, what I'm saying is Israel has also had a trauma. Israelis have suffered a trauma. Israelis are still suffering a trauma from October 7th and to this day. The families of the hostages who are in Israel, they are not, even though they weren't kidnapped or captured or something, they are still suffering because their loved one is in Gaza, right? And there's a lot of emphasis on Palestinian civilians, none at all on Israeli civilians as well. There's over 200,000 Israelis who are displaced within Israel because of this war. They've also had to move. Israel's economy is being affected. Israel's, distribution supplies and things. Okay, it's not to the same degree as with what's happening in Gaza. But what I'm saying is there's all these traumas that are happening for Israelis, for Israel, for the Jewish people, and actually the media does not even care, does not give it the time of day. It focuses only on the Palestinians, and it just tries to make them, the biggest victims in all of this, when actually the first victims were the Jewish people who were attacked on October 7th and continue to be the victims of Palestinian terrorism. And I would even argue that the Palestinians in Gaza are the victims of Hamas, not the victims of Israel. Because all of these actions, all of these consequences have happened because of Hamas. And we have seen within Gaza a few videos that have got out from it where there are people who are against Hamas because they blame Hamas for everything that's happened because they had...
that's interesting because that's certainly not the tone that we...
No, of course not.
We see on the streets of London. That... many of whom don't see that Hamas have done any wrong.
No,
certainly all those which do protest, who do not call out for Hamas's removal and condemn Hamas, are actually siding with them. There are no calls. When you hear calls for a ceasefire, we want a ceasing of fire in the sense that we want a peace. But those who call for a ceasefire, some, of course, there are many who are calling for a ceasefire that do call for the release of hostages, but on the streets of London, chanting for a ceasefire without calling for the release of the hostages is again completely ignoring the very reason why there is a war in the first place. Exactly.
And ultimately, if Israel stops its offensive against Hamas, it does not bring about a conflict resolution. There are still going to be over 100 people held captive. 133 if we include those who have died in captivity. There's still going to be all these other things which are unresolved. The only resolution for this is actually, like I said at the beginning, if Hamas releases all the hostages and puts down their weapons. Even if there is a hostage exchange or a prisoner exchange, whatever they want to call it, it doesn't solve the issue because what you're doing is you're having an unfair balance where innocent people, innocent Israelis are being held hostage. Israel has got convicted terrorists and criminals in prison, and any exchange that happens means that criminals, some of these people have blood on their hands, Jewish blood, where they've murdered people, and they will then be released. That doesn't bring a resolution. That doesn't solve the problem. That actually makes more of a problem because it releases Israel's enemies and allows them to be free to carry out more attacks against Jews. And yet Israel is willing to do that because it so strongly values its citizens and the life of its citizens. And I think what I'm saying is that Israel actually values human life more than Hamas, but more than a lot of other militaries have demonstrated. And Israel demonstrates that by the fact that it is providing aid to its enemies. Israel is making strategic decisions in Gaza where militarily they have a right to use a lot more force than they're using, but actually they've chosen to be very measured and precise in their strikes, and they've even, in some instances, used their put their military at risk by taking the careful route, because obviously it's a lot safer to drop a bomb from above than it is to send troops in from below. And so what I'm saying is, it's like Israel actually is valuing human life. Hamas is doing everything to devalue human life. It has killed its own people. It's used them as human shields. It has taken civilians and has them as hostages. It only attacks Israeli civilians rather than military.
It's important also to remember regarding the humanitarian aid as well, because we hear a lot about aid getting to Palestinians that are suffering at this time. And of course, there are many people in Gaza who are suffering at this time.
Yeah.
But do you really think that a terrorist organization that is prepared to put its women and children as human shields in hospitals and office blocks and in houses where it is firing from behind them, do you really think that they regard human life enough to be concerned about the humanitarian aid getting to the people that it needs to get to?
I know, not at all. There is evidence of Hamas firing at civilians who are trying to access aid. There's countless videos of Hamas stealing aid trucks, like dozens and dozens of aid trucks being stolen by Hamas for their own purposes. They do not care about the Palestinian people. Hamas does not care about the Palestinian people. And that brings the question, when you see, like you were saying, these protests on the streets of London where they're supporting Hamas and getting angry when someone holds a sign up saying Hamas are terrorists, those people also do not care about the Palestinians. And actually, I would say we care more about the Palestinian people than many of the people on the streets of London who are protesting, because what they care about is destroying Israel and painting Israel in a bad light and all these different things. What we want is peace. There can only ever be peace when you accept Israel as existing, when you accept Jews as living. The Jewish people aren't going anywhere. And until that is understood, you're not going to have peace. And the problem, that's the problem.
Amen. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there. And just going back then to the international community, because Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said this week in a cabinet meeting, he said, "To our friends in the international community, I say, is your memory so short? So quickly you forgot about October the 7th, the worst massacre committed against Jews since the Holocaust. So quickly you are ready to deny Israel the right to defend itself against the monsters of Hamas." And so this is a pushback from criticism regarding not just Israel's actions in Gaza in general, but also specifically about the decision that Benjamin Netanyahu continues to remind the international community that they will enter Rafah, which is one of the last remaining strongholds in Gaza for Hamas. And one of the things which Benjamin Netanyahu also said this week at a Knesset meeting, he said, "We have a disagreement with the Americans about the need to enter Rafah. Not about the need to eliminate Hamas, the need to enter Rafah. We do not see a way to eliminate Hamas militarily without destroying these remaining battalions. We are determined to do it. I made it clear to the President in our conversation in the clearest way that we are determined to complete the elimination of these battalions in Rafah. There is no way to do it except by going in on the ground." And this was in response to President Biden, who said that he ruled out any potential support for a major Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. He said a major ground offensive there would be a mistake. It would lead to more innocent civilian deaths, worsen the already dire humanitarian crisis, and deepen the anarchy in Gaza, and further isolate Israel internationally. That is something the US National Security Advisor said. So there's a lot of pushback on this.
Well, there is, and
thoughts,
we'll get to some of the other comments that other leaders have said as well. But I think one thing we need to sort of clarify here is, at CUFI, we're non-partisan in politics, so we don't have a preference when it comes to politics of any nation, internationally and including Israel. So when we quote Netanyahu, it's not an endorsement of his words. It's just quoting him as the leader of Israel and respecting his position as leader of Israel.
Well, sorry. I mean, we don't
so-
involve in party politics in Israel and make endorsements and such. But he is the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Yeah.
And we give respect and we give honor to the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And we need to pray for him.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I mean, he is the leader of Israel. He was democratically elected. The people of Israel chose his government. It's a coalition government of multi parties.
Have you told Schumann that?
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't told Schumer that, no.
Okay. Which, by the way, is because Senator Chuck Schumer said this week that they needed to hold elections.
Yeah, exactly.
And Benjamin Netanyahu said it's not for our sister democracies to basically interfere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean,
but whether or not, we're not going to get into the politics of Israel, but it was an interference. From
exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's
politician.
Up to the Israeli people who they elect and when they hold elections.
Yeah.
It's that's he should not get involved in that.
I'm sorry, I just diverted a little bit.
No, it's fine. I think that just shows something that was unwise there. I mean, it's up to Israelis when they have another election, and I'm quite sure as well there are probably many Israelis who are calling for an election and things.
Yeah. So we're playing for Bibi. We're playing for Bibi.
That's not the point.
And we're supporting the Prime Minister of the State of Israel in what is a historic, unprecedented in our lifetime set of circumstances.
Yeah.
A fight for the survival of the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
And for its future security as well.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, I'm going to let you get a word in now.
No, that's fine. So I agree with that. We definitely do need to pray for Netanyahu. But the point I'm trying to make actually is more about the there's obviously this need for Israel to get its hostages back. Israel needs to go in, or in its mind, it needs to go in and take Israel. And take Rafah, I should say. That is up to Israel what it does. We need, like you said, we need to pray for the government of Israel, pray for wisdom for the leaders. Ultimately, we want peace. We want this to be over. And as I've said all along, Hamas is responsible for this war. They can end this war. Yes. It's up to them. But if needed, Israel is going to go in and finish the job. And that's basically what Netanyahu's saying. He's saying, we are going to go in. We're going to do this. He might be saying it from a position of power that he needs to show Hamas that they're not backing down.
Because could you imagine if he said, "Oh no, we're not actually going to bother with Hamas"?
Yeah.
With Rafah, that gives, and then Hamas is going to say, "Well, that gives us a stronger position in terms of negotiating."
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, we probably are not going to negotiate.
Exactly.
They might say because the threat is not there.
Yeah.
Whereas Netanyahu is saying basically, and I do think he means it, by the way. But he's saying we're on your doorstep. Yeah. And whilst he continues with that position, it would work more favourably to Israel's strength when it comes to negotiating for the hostages.
Yeah, I agree. And the problem, though, is instead of showing strength and support for Israel against terrorism, bearing in mind the Western world for years literally was saying, we do not negotiate with terrorists, and they have proven it through many years of NATO intervention and so forth in the Middle East, that they will do anything they need to eradicate certain terror groups in the region. When it comes to Hamas, they are not saying that. And in fact, they're showing weakness because they are the ones who are weakening Israel's stance in negotiations. If America, the UK, the European Union and so forth said, yes, Hamas, you're finished, Hamas would be in a position where they have to make a decision, okay, we'll negotiate or not. But instead, Israel's position is constantly being undermined and weakened by their own allies. And that includes our own government, the British government, but it includes other nations around the world. So, for example, Canada, for example, this week has announced that it is not going to be selling arms to Israel anymore. And obviously they're doing it from this position which they think is morally correct, which is they believe that because of alleged war crimes and so forth in Gaza, they therefore cannot break their own laws by giving arms to Israel, even though I do not believe personally that Israel is committing war crimes, and I don't believe I don't believe this is the correct decision.
It's also a double standard.
It's definitely a double standard, yeah.
And they're saying that, they're saying the same sort of statements in terms of Israel has a right to defend itself, and yet you withdraw military support. And it should be pointed out that allies such as Canada do contribute significantly to Israel's military assets.
Yeah.
They actually withdrew non-lethal aid back in February.
Yeah.
But now they've gone the full hog in withdrawing. So it is for me as an indicator of where the current leadership of Canada. I know that a lot of politicians in Canada do not support it, but in terms of the leadership, it's sort of a big indicator of where they stand. It's a weakening.
Yeah, it is a weakening, and this is Justin Trudeau. It's under his leadership, obviously, that this has happened. He has come out. This is a separate quote, but he's talking about the need for humanitarian aid. So he said that he has concerns about Israel's planned assault on Rafah, and he basically said the planned offensive would create have severe humanitarian implications for all civilians taking refuge in the area. He understood the need to increase the volume of life-saving humanitarian aid for civilians and to ensure aid reaches all those in need safely and without delay. So he's obviously looking at it, or they're looking at it from a humanitarian need for the Palestinians rather than a strategic need for Israel to win this war. And ultimately, obviously, we do have to be moral and we do have to be, kind and caring to our fellow human beings, but they're looking at it from one direction and they're not looking at the big picture. And I think that shows a lack of wisdom because it undermines Israel's position and it puts the emphasis on.
It also sets a dangerous precedent, I think, because the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn was going to, had he won the election when he was leader, would have withdrawn British military support for Israel.
Yeah, he would have even gone further.
I mean, it was in their manifesto.
Yeah.
That
but he would have even blocked intelligence sharing, which would have actually damaged our self-defense.
And that was
terrorism.
that was at a time when Israel was not in a permanent warfare with, of course, it's being an ongoing conflict, but not on a permanent warfare like we're at now. So could you imagine now?
I know if you had Corbyn as leader right now, it would be
what that does in Canada is that it does set a precedent that, well, when does that? Do you see what I mean? It's sort of like in peacetime, will some of these countries which are making the decision now also withdraw its support for Israel further down the line?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I actually had a thought about this before we started filming. One thing I noticed is when the lady, I don't know the politician, but I saw a picture of the person who announced that Canada was going to be having an arms embargo on Israel. She was very happy. She was smiling and gleeful. And I thought to myself, that's an odd thing. Like, if you're looking at this situation, it's a sad and troubling situation sort of thing. But if you truly love Israel and you truly think Israel's your ally, but you think it's doing bad things in Gaza, your response wouldn't be glee or happiness. Your response would be, we've had to take this tough decision.
Yeah, we
love Israel, but we cannot support them in this. And you would be like more somber, you would think. But actually, there was glee there.
Wow.
And I noticed the same with Joseph Borrell from the European Union. He was very smiley when the European Union announced that they were putting sanctions upon some Israeli settlers. So there's the UK has done this as well, by the way, where we've sanctioned 4 Israeli settlers who are extremist settlers. Now, if there is extremism, if there is violence, things like that, obviously we don't stand behind that. But what that does, in my mind, is this whataboutery thing. It's like, okay, we've sanctioned Hamas, now we're going to sanction some Israelis as well to put them on the same level.
It did feel like that.
That's what it felt like, yeah.
It felt publicised by that because the reports in the media was that, in terms of, this is back in February with the UK, was that Britain had sanctioned Israeli settlers.
Yeah.
That's literally the headline.
Yeah.
And it's like, what, all of them?
Yeah, exactly. But it's just four
I
individuals.
read the government report, and it was four specific individuals who, by the way, and we're not endorsing we're not obviously supporting what they've alleged to have done. Yeah. But even when you think about a foreign entity almost being judge and jury of something else which is happening in another country about individual settlers, it's quite interesting. But anyway, that's another point. And but it was used as a way, we're doing this regarding Hamas, but we're also doing this, on the other hand, just to be able to...
Because they're basically appeasing people. Yeah. So going back to this Glee thing, I was thinking to myself, like, what is it that has made... Why are they gleeful about this? And I think what it is you sort of sparked my memory on it when you said about Jeremy Corbyn was willing to do that in peacetime, which obviously shows his anti-Israel sentiment. Like, he is very anti-Israel. But these people had to have a catalyst for this to happen. And I think it shows that they're still anti-Israel, or at least not favourable to Israel. But because their pro-Israel support is in their head, not in their heart.
Yes. Yeah.
And so what it is in their head, Israel's a democracy. Israel... has free and fair elections. Israel's, a liberal society, all these different things. In their head, they're like, okay, I can support these things. I stand with Israel. But when they stand on stage in peacetime, they're saying, we stand wholeheartedly behind Israel, all this stuff. Well, it's all lies. It's all politics, right? It's them pulling the wool over people's eyes. Because when the rubber hits the road, when there is an actual war, any excuse they have, they will turn on Israel.
Yes.
And this is what it is. It is like, Israel is being falsely accused of war crimes. Israel is being falsely accused of creating a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It is not doing those things. Israel is trying to win a war against a terrorist organization, and it is acting in one of the most humane ways you can in warfare, and warfare is very inhumane, right?
Yes.
And yet, these people, with a smile on their face, at the first opportunity they could, have turned against Israel. I think it just shows the heart behind it.
Yeah, it's almost like the foundation is one of sand and not of rock.
Yes, exactly.
Just, as soon as the storm comes, it's like, where do they really stand? And this is a test.
Yeah,
this is actually, when you think about it like that, what we're currently seeing now is almost a testing of where we stand morally, and in case of Christians and Jews, where we stand biblically in standing with Israel. Yeah. Because, we're seeing the testing in politics, we're seeing the testing in the media, we're seeing the testing even in the church.
Yeah.
And we need it to be the foundation, of course, the foundation is the Bible.
Yeah.
And the foundation is also, the truth, which is the Bible, but facts, and that's where we need it to be grounded upon.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, when I said all Israeli settlers, I was obviously using a term that British foreign policy uses for those that are living in the so-called West Bank, Judea and Samaria. That was obviously a foreign policy reference, and we don't call them settlers.
No, we call them Israelis.
We call them Israelis.
They are Jewish people living in the land of Israel, as we see it, in their ancient homeland, which was given to them by God Almighty. And we, the media, politicians, the UN, whoever can call them settlers, but actually they are Jews living in Israel, in their ancient homeland.
Yes, yeah.
So,
So before we continue, we need to do an advert. This is the brand new Torch magazine. It's out now, and someone familiar is going to tell you about it. The latest issue of Torch magazine from Christians United for Israel UK is out now. Arm yourself with the truth about Israel with this free magazine, available to read online instantly or receive by post if you live in the UK. In this issue, we describe the horrific events of 7th of October, when Hamas invaded Israel and massacred Jews, and why it is vital we bear witness of the evil anti-Semitism that was committed on that tragic day. We also explain the rise in anti-Semitism here in Britain and how Christians must respond. Plus, we look at whether the so-called two-state solution is actually a two-state delusion. Our magazine is packed with important facts to help you stand with Israel. But it also includes articles to encourage and inspire, such as the incredible story behind Israel's national emblem and its link to the Arch of Titus, plus what God says about the land he promised to the Jewish people. Get your copy today by going to cufi.org.uk/torch.
And we're back. So yes, let's carry on talking though about some of these politicians, political figures who've been saying bad things about Israel. I've mentioned his name a few times, Joseph Borrell. Who is he? Well, he's the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, meaning he's the EU's head of foreign policy. So he's quite influential when dealing with Israel. And some of his comments recently have just been atrocious. And I think it just shows, I mean, he's always been, like I said, a head person rather than a heart person when it comes to Israel. But I think now he's showing actually his heart is anti-Israel because he's coming out with actual, libel against Israel. So he said this. He said that Gaza was before the war the greatest open-air prison, which, by the way, is a lie or was a lie. And he says today it is the greatest open-air graveyard. So just think about that. Wow. I mean, he's saying these inflammatory remarks, and he goes on, it's a graveyard for tens of thousands of people and also a graveyard for many of the most important principles of humanitarian law. And he said Israel he basically accused Israel of using famine as a weapon of war. He said Israel is provoking a famine. And I just think that is such inflammatory language. I mean, like we say...
It's not even diplomatic.
It's not diplomatic, no. But the thing is, this is the thing. The gloves are off with this man because he is serving his last ever stint at being the EU's foreign policy chief.
Okay.
So he doesn't need to win election anymore. He doesn't need to show himself as being in any way balanced on these things. And also, this is the biggest time of his career when Israel's actually at war and he can attack Israel. Yeah. And I think this shows the heart behind the man. And so the gloves are off for him. He's saying whatever he wants and he's spreading these libels. And so I just wanted to highlight with the food trucks, I mean, Kogat, which is Israel's coordinators on the ground for supplying aid into Israel, they basically put out their statistics which show that since the beginning of March, an average of 126 food trucks have entered Gaza daily. And this is 80% more food trucks entering Gaza compared to before October 7th. So before October 7th, an average of 70 food trucks per day were entering Gaza. Now, in total, there are around 500 trucks. But of those 500 trucks, there was a lot of building materials. There was a lot of sort of agricultural materials, supplies, I don't know, toys, cars, like anything like that. Now, obviously, they're only focusing on the humanitarian needs, so primarily food. And so they've gone from 70 trucks of food per day to 126, so 80% increase. And I think it just shows, actually, that Israel is doing a lot to try and alleviate the humanitarian needs of the of the Gaza Strip, of the Palestinian people. Ultimately, it's a dire situation there. There is a need for aid. If Israel doesn't step in, someone else has to. But this is Israel providing aid to its enemies, and Israel knows that Hamas is stealing a good amount of this aid for themselves. And the more aid Hamas steals, the more it can keep living in its tunnels and digging its holes deeper, sort of thing, and defending itself in there because it has the supplies it needs. Whereas during the middle of the war, or at the early stages of the war, the Hamas itself was struggling to provide food to the hostages and to its own people. They're having to drink salt water and things like that. There's been testimonies of the hostages. And this shows that actually Israel knows it's damaging its attack against Hamas by providing aid because they know Hamas is stealing it and they know it's causing these problems. But Israel is showing its humanity to Gaza by trying to provide this. And yet you have people like Joseph Borrell saying that Israel is provoking famine and using famine as a weapon of war. So what he's saying is a complete lie. It's flipping reality on its head.
Actually, it's using this whole accusation as a weapon of war. It's undermining Israel's honesty, humanity,
Yeah.
integrity, in a way which is ultimately intended to shift public opinion.
Yeah.
And public opinion is swayed when really on the basis of how people, how humans are treated. It's not necessarily swayed on Israel's military operations against Hamas.
Yeah.
It is determined based on this this incorrect narrative, or has the potential to be swayed.
Yeah.
Based on that. So I think that's the goal.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's the thing. I mean, we are human beings. We are swayed when we see people suffering, when you see children, begging for food and all these things. Like, clearly everyone's heartstrings are pulled at this. But when you look at the numbers, when you look at the reality of the situation, it's like it's not as bad as people are saying. Is it bad for Palestinians? Of course it is. We're not saying they're living a lovely life in Gaza right now. But the reality is that Israel is doing all it can to counteract the negative aspects of this war.
Yes, which is interesting because there was a bit of a controversy involving David Cameron, the former, sorry, not the former. Well, it depends when this podcast goes out, doesn't it? The Foreign Secretary, British Foreign Secretary, who, got decided to get involved when he didn't agree with something that the Israeli spokesperson, Elon Levy, said. And we can read into it, whatever we want. But I do think it's quite an important thing that we highlight this. So David Cameron said, he tweeted, "People in Gaza are in desperate humanitarian need. Alongside the US, the UK and partners have announced we will open a maritime corridor to deliver aid directly to Gaza. We continue to urge Israel to allow more trucks into Gaza as the fastest way to get aid to those who need." And Elon Levy, in a now deleted tweet, and by the way, he's a spokesperson for Israel. You've probably seen him. He was born in Britain, very articulate. You've probably seen him on the BBC and Sky News and other channels speaking on primetime news, defending Israel. He tweeted, "I hope you are also aware," this is in reply to David Cameron, "I hope you are also aware there are no limits on the entry of food, water, medicine, or shelter equipment into Gaza. And in fact, the crossings have excess, in uppercase letters, capacity. Testers, send another 100 trucks a day to Kerem Shalom and we'll get them in."
Yeah.
Now, following that tweet, the Foreign Office wrote to the Israeli government.
So the UK Foreign Office wrote to the Israeli government.
The UK Foreign Office wrote to the Israeli government asking if the post they deemed critical of Cameron was the country's official position. And then Levy was suspended.
Yeah.
Now, we must just clarify the fact that we don't know the exact reason why Israel has suspended Elon Levy, and we don't really want to preempt the state of Israel's government's decision to do that. However, on the surface, it is clear that the Foreign Office did not like the Israeli spokesperson's response to David Cameron directly, probably publicly. I mean, that probably isn't something that that British protocol, at least, would do publicly. I don't know. I'm only guessing. But let's just put it plainly. Britain complained about what seems to be, to me, to be quite an accurate reply.
Yeah.
And he is now suspended.
Yeah.
And it seems as though he might not be returning.
Yeah. And this, I think there's a number of things about this. First of all, David Cameron was saying something which was undermining Israel. This is going back to the undermining Israel. It's basically saying, Israel, you're not doing enough, and because of that, we're creating this maritime corridor, basically. It undermines Israel's position when it is doing more for Gaza than any, under Cameron, we literally attacked Libya. Did we send them hundreds of aid trucks when we took out Gaddafi? No. When we went against ISIS, did we send their civilians a load of aid trucks? No. Like, it's such a hypocritical position, because it's taking this I'm better than you, looking down at you sort of position. And all it does is it undermines Israel. It's undermining Israel's position. It's damaging their reputation in the public eye. And like you said, I mean, COGAT, the numbers I was quoting here, they literally say there is no limit to the amount of food and humanitarian aid that can enter the Gaza Strip. So he's not said anything wrong. He's just maybe gone against protocol. But it shows this anti-Israel. In my opinion, David Cameron is anti-Israel, especially in what he's saying. The Foreign Office has been known to be has an anti-Israel slant for a long time.
A bias. I mean, he wouldn't admit to being anti-Israel.
Yeah, no, of course he wouldn't. No, I mean, David Cameron claims he is pro-Israel. I mean, but I think it's this heart-head thing. And in my opinion, if you're going to turn your back on Israel at the first opportunity and you're going to undermine them, I don't think you're pro-Israel. Let's put it that way. I think you may be pro a version of Israel that's in your mind, but you're not standing with Israel properly. So I think it just shows that there is this bias against Israel from our foreign policy. And I think look at the results of that. Our foreign minister is speaking out against Israel, which undermines its position and spreads negative headlines around the world and causes people to turn away from Israel. Our Foreign Office has effectively silenced a very pro-Israel voice within our country, because Elon Levy is, born in Britain, now an Israeli citizen, and he has been a prominent voice of support for Israel, a prominent voice batting away all these lies, and they've got him on a technicality. They've managed to get him out there because he was a problem. And this is going back to the spiritual war that is happening with Israel. We are on God's side in this conflict, and I believe Elon Levy was defending Israel and a good thing for Israel's cause. And actually now his voice has been taken away from public airways. He's not going to be called up by Sky News or the BBC to defend Israel anymore. And yet he was great at what he was doing. He was really good at his job. Now he's gone on to other things. He's hosting a talk show and all
Although
these things.
he's suspended.
Oh, he's suspended. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, he is suspended.
So he might return.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, it's like, this is British, like, these are our leaders in the UK who have done this, and it's undermined Israel's position in the public eye.
Yeah.
And they're acting as this sort of moral superiority against Israel, when actually they're the opposite, because it's doing the opposite of what is good, because the results of what they've done have not been good, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it captivates all of these different things, because we've spoken about the EU, we've spoken about Schumer, in America, we've spoken about obviously now the UK and things. All of these things, these are Israel's allies who should be standing with Israel stronger than ever, and yet in Israel's time of need, they are undermining Israel and shaping public opinion away from Israel, and it's damaging Israel, and that is a bad thing.
It is. Well, I thought we would close with a scripture which is the opposite to that, Alex,
right?
And that is just proclaiming blessing upon Israel and the Jewish people from Numbers chapter 24 verses 5-9. Says this: "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like valleys that stretch out, like gardens by the riverside, like aloes planted by the Lord, like cedars beside the waters. He shall pour water from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. God brings him out of Egypt. He has strength like a wild ox. He shall consume the nations, his enemies. He shall break their bones and pierce them with his arrows. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? Blessed is he who blesses you, and cursed is he who curses you." Of course, that reference going back to the promise which God gave Abraham regarding his seed being a blessing to the nations, and the promise, really, that God will bless those that bless this nation, the nation of Israel, and curse those that are cursed. But So it's helpful to have that reminder. We repeat it often.
Yep. We always say it's as easy as 1, 2, 3, don't we?
Easy as Genesis 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, Genesis 12 verse 3.
Yeah.
Easy as 1, 2, 3.
But I love that passage because it also begins with just a real expression of love for Israel and the fact that the dwellings of Israel, you know, and the land which God has promised his people, because it isn't just a promise regarding the people, although it is absolutely, it's also a promise which attaches the land to the people to a land.
Yeah.
And it's that land that we're talking about here today. It's the land of Israel.
Yep.
And so we want to just glorify God with our words and our actions by just proclaiming the word of God over the land of Israel, which God has blessed, which God has set apart. And right now, the Jewish people are defending with their lives.
Yeah, exactly.
But God is defending Israel.
Yep.
And, he promises to neither slumber or to sleep.
Yep, exactly.
So God is watching, and God is watching those who turn against Israel as well. So let the words from our lips be one of blessing and not of cursing the land which God has promised to the Jewish people. And if you stand with us in that conviction, then we're very grateful that you are part of this community of Christians that are standing with Israel. Here at CUFI, Christians United for Israel, we have a purpose of proclaiming God's truth at this time, in this land, for such a time as this. We thank you for getting on board with us by watching through this podcast. And now, if you we'd be very grateful if you could like and share it and comment and subscribe. But also, if you would like to support the work of CUFI even further, then we invite you to please make a donation. Consider what you can give towards the work by making a donation at cufi.org.uk/donate.
Yep.
And we have something called partnership, CUFI partnership, which is really a way of being able to give towards the work on a regular basis, a monthly basis. And by doing that, you are helping to sustain the work and enabling us to do even more. So any form of giving, and of any amount, I should add, is greatly appreciated. And of course, please pray. Please pray for the work. This is a time when we should be, as Christians, we should be on our knees praying for our own nation, praying for Israel, and as we started at the very beginning, praying for the hostages. Let us not forget them. And so, thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching this or listening. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.